we've had. Getting ready for this, we're just going to jump right in because we have so many things to talk about in such a little window of time, and Steve can just join us whenever he gets able to do that. So connecting to our back end is not super easy for those of you who don't know what we got going on back here. Okay, so welcome to Survivor Rights, to our second show. Today we are talking about the full impact of the complete fallout of everything that happened with everyone leaving after Brewergate, and all of the things that came after that. So we have quite an agenda around of that. But our purpose of our episode today is really to talk about the full spectrum of harm that was done. Our guest today is Dr. Natalie Bolin, and she runs Pathways to Healing, which came out of and is you can tell us a little bit about Pathways to Healing. I want to talk about that, but here at Survivor Rights, we very much partner directly with them and make sure that everybody is aware of their advocacy program and everything else. So go ahead and give us a little plug on that first, and we'll move on from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, hello everyone. I can't see you, but welcome to tonight's episode. Pathways to Healing evolved out of AFTT when we decided to really split up investigation from survivor care. Under AFTT, it was one umbrella, and we decided to split it up into two separate nonprofits. So Cynthia has the 2x2 accountability group, and we partner with her very closely, and I started the nonprofit Pathways to Healing Network. And it's really two arms. So we have our clinical support where we help connect survivors to trauma-informed therapy, and we'll work with the other funds out there if funding is needed for that treatment. And then the other arm is our education and our advocacy. And so we offer a 9-week advocacy course. It's a self-paced course that individuals can take. And if you want more information, reach out, let me know. I'll connect you with Jan Morton, who is our Director of Education.
Awesome. So the huge focus over the last couple of years for all of us has been all of the sexual abuse because the numbers are ridiculous. But as we have been talking, and I started Worthy almost 2 years ago, it became very, very obvious to me. Steve and I started a conversation with his wife Amy also around the whole humanitarian crisis that was starting to occur and all of the other fallouts. And that's really what we wanted to talk about today. So there's so many layers to this. Everything from the emotional, the psychological, the relational, the spiritual, the identity, all of the traumas that come with all of that, whether you're a CSA survivor or not, just leaving the 2x2 church, being involved with the 2x2 church, all of those things leave us with those traumas. That's really what Survivor Rights is here to do, is also to kind of widen that discussion from just focusing on CSA to all of the other types of trauma and all of the ways that we need to be healing regardless of how we got to this moment that we're sitting here right now having this dialogue around. Oh my goodness. So our goal today is to give you guys a language for what you've lived through so that you're able to really understand that you're not the only one feeling this way. I think so many of us went through it and feel like maybe we're the only ones that feel this way. And also we want to validate how complex this whole process really is, and that it's not linear, and that it's like all over the place, and that if you're in it at any stage, that we are here to help you get the resources that you need and connect with the people that you need to connect with, whether you're a CSA survivor or not. So whatever we're going to talk about today, we're going to really broaden this discussion to be about all types of the fallout, of the full impact of what happened to us as humans in the humanitarian crisis that's happening for thousands around the world that have left. And then also permission to move at your own pace without minimizing the pain, because it hurts. And so we were just talking on Worthy a little bit ago about, how often they refer to us as angry and bitter. And it's like angry and bitter, like it's just let's talk about the things you're saying about us, and let's talk about the way you've treated us, and let's talk about the fact that nobody's reached out to us, and let's all these other things. So, um, we're going to hopefully have some dialogue around helping you move forward and giving you guys a language on how you can reply to that. We talked a lot about just coming to a place of conviction for ourselves, but I don't want to get ahead of where we are. We have so much to get through. So, the first segment that we're going to talk about is the system, not just the crime. So, the crime that happened is one aspect of abuse, but many crimes that happened, so many other things about the system have been traumatizing. Natalie, tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, it was that aha moment for me. It was right after Brewergate letter, and just watching the lack or the poor response that the ministry had to this evolving crisis. It was that aha moment of like, oh, we're dealing with a narcissistic system. A lot of times we hear about narcissistic individuals, and yes, and there are absolutely narcissistic individuals, but there's also narcissistic systems. And so when you think about, okay, what is that? Well, it's can be, and it's a group. It can be a family. You can have a narcissistic family. You can have a workplace, a church, which I'll kind of go more into detail about. You can have a culture that's narcissistic, and it's where people organize around meeting the needs or protecting the image of one or a few individuals at the expense of everyone else. So the system revolves around preserving the power, status, image. Image is really important. And so you've got rules, either spoken or unspoken, which prioritize loyalty and protection of either one person or a group of people, like over truth, over the health and fairness of the situation. And so when we saw like the wagons kind of circling around perpetrators, it was like, whoa, wait a minute, what is going on? And so, we saw a lot of gaslighting, a ton of minimization. Blame shifting is very common in these types of systems. And it almost causes people to kind of doubt their perception. Like, wait, am I thinking about this correctly? So when you think about like a narcissistic system, it is image control, it is image management, and that takes precedence over everything else.
Yes.
So then that kind of moves into what we were starting to see is spiritual abuse. And so you're going to have abuse with any system that has unchecked authority. You just are. And so when you have overseers and you have workers that wield unchecked spiritual authority, where questions that come to them kind of get framed as lack of faith. Oh, you're questioning one's salvation. I mean, even questioning Jesus. Um, that's spiritual abuse. And I know, Crystal, you and I were talking earlier. Do you know how many questions I get a day? If I had to, and I have to explain my decisions all the time.
Right.
And if I reacted like an overseer or how the workers reacted, I wouldn't have a job. I mean,
They have the bubble that they're in is just so not, real.
no,
It's not real world.
it is not real world.
It's not.
And so we have to answer questions, all the time. And
Yes.
so when we start like thinking about spiritual abuse and um, how that is used to manipulate situations. So using Bible verses taken completely out of context, right? To demand silence or to kind of reclaim that unquestioning obedience. That's what I'm talking about. There's another area of spiritual abuse that I think it's important to call out, and that's spiritual bypass. So when you use spiritual bypassing, is using spirituality to avoid real emotion or psychological work. Um, and so you'll hear common examples like, well, everything happens for a reason. Um, and that's used to shut down grief, anger, injustice. This was always my favorite. The way is perfect, but the people aren't.
Right.
You'll hear that a ton, right? And so another form of spiritual bypass is using meditation, prayer, just traditions to escape the problems instead of actual seeking ways to help it or change it. Um, Another very common spiritual bypass that I was picking up in responses from overseers and workers saying, well, we're spirit led. So this totally avoids taking responsibility for hurtful behavior and stupid
Yes.
decisions, right? And so we have seen a lot of that come up. I think we're going to talk about shame further on in the segment, but emotional abuse, where it's within the church culture, right?
Yes.
Of where children and adults are constantly faced with scrutiny of appearance, thoughts, um, unwritten rules, where you say there's no rules, but there's rules, right?
Rules.
Oh, there's rules. And so, then when people start questioning things, then you're labeled, right? You're
Yep.
labeled as, oh, you're rebellious or you're of the world or whatever that is. And so then that kind of leads into this um, course of control and isolation that, um, where we were always taught, like, hey, your life revolves around going to meetings, going to gospel meetings, conventions. Like, there was no question about where your time went. And so there was really heavy pressure to attend everything. In fact, workers kept track, right, on who attract or who attended what.
Yeah.
Um, and so then you think about our marriages, our education, our careers were influenced by
Yes.
the church, right? By the group.
Yep.
And so those are huge life decisions that the church really had a lot of impact. And so when we talk about like that course of control and isolation, um, it's huge. Like we were taught
Yes.
to like separate ourselves from the world. Don't be careful on who you hang out with. Really keep it within the group. So there was some natural isolation that happened with being part of the church.
Absolutely. And that's, one of the things we talked through is just the whole spiritual and the emotional and the coercive control that happened. And then the shunning and
Yeah,
yes, in addition, and the reputation destruction of us,
absolutely.
so
Yep.
many things that we just, that is the system that we just, I don't know, man. It's just crazy.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
trying to let Steve in here. So go ahead. I want finish what you're about to say because I know you're going to go right on to segment two, which is the hidden mental health toll. So go
yes.
ahead and talk right through that. I'm going to try work on getting Steve in here.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, so we'll talk about the second segment is the hidden mental health tool. And I would say fear-based systems, and we're talking a lot about the two by two church, can function like chronic trauma. And you think about chronic trauma impacting you time and time and time again. It shapes the nervous system, it shapes your identity, um, it can impact your attachment patterns, attachment that you have maybe with your kids, with other people, in ways that can come out in physical ways. So I love Dr. Gabor Mate and his work around trauma and disease. I'll kind of talk about adverse childhood experiences, the ACE study, but I'm actually working through Dr. Mate's book, When the Body Says No, the hidden costs or the hidden stress. Um, I will say it's a hard read. Um, the print is really small. You feel like you're reading a textbook, but his message is pretty impactful, and it's about how chronic stress and suppressed emotions contribute to physical illness. So the book really focuses on the mind body connection and how if we can't say no, our body's going to start saying no. And our
Mm.
body is going to start setting limits for us. So, a key theme is that the mind and body are inseparable. And I would say modern medicine can often like miss this. You know, when somebody goes in for a chronic physical diagnosis, a lot of times they don't get asked about their trauma history, right? Similarly, in the mental health world, some clinicians kind of miss the connection of physical health with mental health symptoms. And so when I was doing direct work with clients, before I gave a mental health diagnosis, I would send them to get a physical health. A lot of times, clients coming in, it's been a while since they had a physical. I want to see their blood panel. I want to look at, is there a physical something going on that's causing these symptoms or vice versa. So we have some work to do, I think, in the physical health world and in the mental health world. But Dr. Matei does amazing work, and I love his trauma discussion. The ACEs study, so this adverse childhood experiences, this was a large study done in the mid 90s. They started publishing their work in late 90s, like 98. And it was a Kaiser study with people coming in that were obese. And they started questioning them about their early childhood experiences. And what they found is the connection to early childhood experiences and chronic physical conditions. And it started around obesity and people coming in to be treated that way. And what this research morphed into is a 9-item inventory. You can go online and Google ACEs, and you can get the inventory off online. You can take it yourself. And there are 9 questions, and it asks things like, did you grow up with an alcoholic parent? Did you experience sexual abuse? Was there domestic violence in your home? And each item that you say yes to, you get a number. And the higher your ACE score is, the greater chance of having chronic illness. And so this ACEs framework really shows that, when a child grows up with pervasive fear, shame, a lack of emotional safety, their risk for anxiety, depression, disassociation, substance abuse can be tied in there. Chronic disease, it rises in a physical health disorder. And so it was a great study. I will say I would love to do research to add a 10th inventory on religious trauma, because I think
Interesting.
that should be added as an ACE inventory. And I think there's been some work done on that. But I would love to try to, in my spare time,
Yes.
influence that. But anyways, so then you move into like other disorders. You talk about chronic stress.
Right.
Um, in the 2x2 environment, there's that constant vigilant around workers' approval,
Yes.
sin. It's all tied to salvation, right?
Right.
And so this is the type of, and it starts at early childhood where I remember as a child having a fear of dying, right?
Yes.
Before professing or before baptism, because we heard about those stories at
Right.
convention. Um, and so that really plays into it. Um, I will say there's a great Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She used to be our Surgeon General for California. She has a great TED Talk on how childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime. So it's a worth a worth a watch. It's like 17 minutes long, and it goes into more detail in this and really kind of helps understand ACEs.
We'll be putting all of these links in the comments of this. And then
Yeah.
also when we post it on YouTube, I'll put all the links in there as well. So for all of the books, the ACEs and the TED Talks so far. So I'm making notes on all that. But
And I'll get
um,
you a list too.
yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, that's, one of the things that I think people may not understand is when we talk about attachment, you and I are trauma informed and have had a lot of training around it. But when we talk about attachment and early childhood development and the relationships that we had with, like, there is just a disconnect. We talk about it a lot with the mother wound, and things that, when there is such a separation, it's very difficult for people to understand that a normal mother would feel a certain way, or that they would, I'm dealing with somebody right now that was told that they couldn't be on a convention grounds at a very young age, and the parents complied, like, because the person was being raped at convention. Like, and that person is now an adult dealing with, like, why would my mom do that or whatever, and I have heard that story so many times. And the wound of that is just like, that's the part, like, I think people had it even in just a disconnect of between a mother and a child in a lot of ways, of just like, you will do this, whatever they say is more important. But so attachment in the unconditional love piece, that's, if you could just talk for 1 second about attachment versus unconditional love, because they are two very different things.
Very, very different things. I want you to think about how many mothers you know or remember growing up that were chronically depressed within the church. I knew quite a few.
Yep.
As a kid, I didn't really put two and two together, but knew that there was a lot of depression.
Yes.
And so then you think about depression and attachment research, and it's frightening when you have moms that have been emotionally unavailable to their children.
Yes.
And then the child develops like this insecure attachment, right? And then so in adulthood, that can look like either you got a codependent person, right, that overdoes it, wants to over secure to individuals,
Yes.
or you got a child that has disorganized attachment, meaning they don't trust the attachment because it was not given in a consistent way from their caregivers. So, like an example, you have parents that act differently within the church versus how they act at home behind closed doors, right? And so you have a child act in such a way, and the reaction of the parent is different depending on the environment they're in. So then the child grows up kind of questioning their identity. Like there's an identity confusion around that. And it's mixed with control, shaming. And then you've got spiritual consequences kind of looped into all of this. And so then you have children growing up feeling I'm only loved when I conform to the church or I'm obedient. And so then that can kind of play into some pretty significant negative cognitions as adults.
So today we're just talking about acknowledgement. We're going to spend a little bit more time, but welcome, Steve. I'm so glad you were able to make it on. Sorry about that.
My
Um,
apologies.
that's okay. Here we are. So you're just in time for your segment. We've been talking about the mental health toll and the difference. We were just having a conversation about the difference between attachment and unconditional love and what a big difference that is. But yeah, we have a lot to get through. We're going to talk about some other tips and tricks on how to navigate them. Today, we really want to just identify the full impact of what truly has happened. And I want anyone out there watching this, to know that they are not alone in the way that they're feeling. So that's the biggest takeaway that we want for today. So segment number 3, Steve, is why leaving doesn't end the damage.
Yeah, it's in some ways, I think leaving can actually be more damaging in certain circumstances, given kind of the enmeshment that happens. There's I've become increasingly understanding of why people make certain choices, and depending on what their circumstances are, there can be a lot of risks either way as they try to move forward, and what that looks like for them. But it's you're leaving a framework for your life that has a lot of structure, and when you kind of discard that, then it can be a free fall for people trying to understand how to live without that structure and definition and certainty. That was one of the things that was my wife articulated early on, that the loss of certainty was actually a big thing to grieve, as you moved into that space of like, oh, I don't have everything figured out. I don't have this plan for all of eternity all figured out. That you lose that as part of leaving the church, and questioning things, and being allowed to question things. That's something that falls away, and you also kind of realize that's not something I'm going to get back. Like, that was a construct. It was very appealing, but it wasn't a real construct, that people can become certain in their faith, but as like, we've got everything figured out, and we are the one true way, like that you realize that's not something that you can have as mentality anymore, and now see it as false, and so it's going to be false in any other construct as well, and that's a lot to grapple with initially, and that's one of the experiences that it was articulated to me that I really resonated with, that part of kind of deconstructing a lot of these foundations for your life felt like you'd reach out and feel like, okay, I'll catch the next thing, and I think this will be a hold firm, and then it would turn to sand in your hands as you're falling, and you reach again, and that would turn to sand, and it's a very unsettling, difficult experience to go through, and as I realized how hard that was for me in a relatively healthy space and with a lot of tools, like, that's a daunting thing for somebody that doesn't have some of those things, and maybe the community behind them, or the support in their family, whatever. Like, it's a lot to ask people to even take on, when they're ready for it. And I think people know that subconsciously, that if I don't have this structure anymore, what does that mean? I don't know I don't know where the bottom of this is going to be, and I think that's it's different for everybody, but it's hard no matter what.
That free fall is intense, and we are, you're not just about your faith, it's about your family, your community, your identity, all of those things all at one time. It's your entire life, and that is, I think, what adds so many layers to it. And I think we were talking a little bit earlier, Steve, and we talked earlier on our Worthy about why some people are now going back, and why the 2x2s that are still in are doing this pretty aggressive trying to bring people back, because they're appealing to the fact of, are you tired of free falling yet? Are you, have you hit rock bottom? Because we're here to pick you up and bring you back right where you need to be. And that's kind of the next wave that's going on here. So
on that topic, for anybody that's seen the movie The Matrix, I've seen it a few times now. There's a character called Cypher, and he's the one that betrays them in the movie, and he's the one that goes back into the Matrix. And that character's never been, I never had any empathy for that character until now, where it's like, oh, I get it. Like, this is hard to not have some of those constructs, whether they're artificial or not. They had a comfort to them, and I understand better, like, when you're kind of in that free fall, you want to go back in because there's safety there, or at least, even if it's just illusionary, there's a lot of comfort in that, and I'm a lot more sympathetic to that character and why people would make that choice.
So what I really also want to just tell everybody is, for those of us who are involved on a regular basis, and that are leading organizations or leading groups of people in this and just try to lead their way through it, not lead, but just how we're going to navigate this. These are dialogues that we are having about how can we work together. Natalie, Cynthia, Steve, Rhonda, there's a whole bunch of us that it's the conversation, and we're finally getting to the point where we're starting to get on the same page of how are we going to move this needle so that we're get past this horrific free fall. Like, it's been that time, but there's a level of responsibility that we're starting to feel of, and the words that you put on it, Steve, I give you full credit for putting the label on it. There is a humanitarian crisis occurring, and it is happening at so many levels for people who are in the free fall of losing everything in their life and trying to navigate that process and doing it alone without, some of us that have had a lot of therapy, we have tools. You just mentioned it, Steve. We've had the tools, we've read the books, we kind of knew we had some resources at our disposal. Not everybody has that. So, do you have anything more that you want to add to why the leaving doesn't end the damage?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I've noticed with some people is that like there are tools to manage life within the construct of the ideology as well, and you kind of lose those too, and that can create some dangers. And I'm sympathetic to people that maybe need a lot of rigid structure because of other challenges with their life, just keeping their life on the rails. And I think leaving for somebody in that situation can be particularly dangerous until they've found a way to replace some of those tools. And so that's why I think people have to really think through is it safe for them, and that's people in domestic violence situations. The research says let them figure out when it's safe for them to leave. Like that's the best practice, and I think it's analogous to that. People decide when it's safe for them, and it may not get there. But what my concern about that is a lot of times the tools that are available to manage their lives are things like shame, and it's not a good motivator long term. It has a huge cost. There's some benefits and there's a cost. It's similar to anxiety. Like, anxiety is a tool to get a lot done in life, but it has a tremendous cost to it. And when those are your tools and you hang on to them as tools to manage your life and keep it going in the direction you want it to, it comes with costs, things like autoimmune diseases eventually. Like it's such a burden on the body over time. It's going to have some outcomes that you really don't want, and that's what I want people to think through. That maybe that this is it's not safe for them to make changes now, but what's the cost of not figuring out when you should make some changes?
Yes. So how do people do that? So first of all, I just want to ask that anybody out there listening, that we have grace for people who, like, so many of us still say, like, why are they still in, or why do they still go to meeting? I think you just described why some of them, people that we know that are struggling to stay, but they can't leave either. So maybe having some grace when we don't understand, like you said, you never had any sympathy for that character. Well, it's kind of hard to have sympathy sometimes for some of these people, but yes, it's very painful, very, very painful. And Natalie was just talking about a lot of the mental health, mind body connection of what happens to our bodies when we don't, she was talking about, you just go to a doctor, and the doctor, like any one of us walking in, it's like, why do you have high blood pressure? Why do you have so much anxiety? Well, they don't understand what we've left or what we've been through or what it is. And so to have language around explaining that, even, and then not even feeling bad, like the shame of standing, the embarrassment of standing there and saying, I did this and I did it for 60 years of my life, and I just didn't know anybody, like, it's like our whole goal today is to help people have a little bit more courage after this conversation than they did coming into it, to say, okay, I'm not alone. I can do this. I can find the courage that I need to have the conversation or get the tools or find the resources, you know. Um, I love the post that you made about marriage this week, Steve. Talk for a second about what drove you to that and where you came up with your analysis on it because I think it was on point.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, um, I mean, the construct of how marriage is viewed in the church has been something that the whole community's kind of thought about as for a long time. There's a lot of divisiveness even within the church about how marriage is seen. Certainly on the West Coast, we see it in some of the most strict fundamental view of it, and that's been a debate for people that's been going to meetings for years. Why is that different? And people taking positions. And so there was a lot of deconstruction for me personally on that front, thinking that I had a solid view on it, and then realizing I had a very different view very quickly. Um, and then kind of trying to understand why that is and how unhealthy that is, and knowing that some of my relatives had stayed in horrific situations and the cost to them, those I've really mourned since, realizing the church's view on marriage was deeply problematic. And so now I was thinking more about the community that has left. I mean, the community that's still in the church still has a framework for marriage, and I don't know if that's ever going to change. I mean, it's changed slowly, but people that have left, it creates a whole new set of challenges around marriage, because when you go into marriage thinking this is a one-shot deal, and then if you deconstruct from that ideology, then all of a sudden that's not the framework. And also you went into a marriage thinking I can only marry people of a certain belief, which, very limited. So the options are very limited. Then now all those things start to, you have to reprocess all these decisions that you made, and like, well, would I would pick this mate in the first place if I hadn't been limited to only people with certain beliefs and a certain population that's very small. And it's easy to and it's just natural to revisit those decisions, and it's like it's a Pandora's box in a lot of ways, but it's something you have to process. Like you now have you're not confronted with all those new choices, and that's true for a lot of deconstructing for a lot of things. You realize there's the burden of choice is now in front of you, and that's very daunting, especially when it has such high consequences as you move through that. And so the reason why I posted that is because I knew that, on a personal level, that people that were going through that, and to some degree going through that myself, and I would encourage people to realize that's a natural thing that you would go through. I think you want to move slowly through it. I think you want to, if possible, get professional support going through that. But just understand that it's a huge thing to try to process. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years into marriage, all of a sudden everything that you kind of framed your whole marriage around falls down, and now you're just trying to sort it all out with all this legacy. It's tough, and there are people making maybe some rash decisions, or maybe decisions that they have wanted to do for years and years, and finally feel like they have the opportunity to do it. So, but there are a lot of marriages I think that are, well, I know that are very much at risk right now,
Yes.
and they probably were for a long time, but now it's actionable, and so it's putting a lot of people in a really tough spot.
Yep. So that leads us, I hate to keep moving forward. We just have so much to talk about. That leads us straight to shame, silence, and self-blame.
We could probably do a whole segment on shame. I love Dr. Brene Brown. I'm going to quote some of her work. She's done quite a few years of study on shame, vulnerability. So looking at shame, she's really tied shame to the feeling of not good enough, or being unworthy of love, unworthy of belonging. And even I have found, working with survivors coming out of the 2x2 church, feeling unworthy for treatment, and that's stemming from shame. And a lot of times we'll see this in survivors where they may reach out for help, but not be able to follow through with some of the therapists we might send their way. And on the face of it, it might look like, maybe motivation or just not having the bandwidth to reach out. But what I've found is the deeper meaning to that is the feeling of unworthiness for treatment. And so, speaking to that, and where does unworthiness come from? It comes from shame. And so, I love how Dr. Brene, she kind of focuses on how understanding and speaking about shame, I mean, honestly, it reduces its power. It's a way of building resilience. Um, she also really brings out like practicing vulnerability. So, honestly, sharing our feelings and need, being authentic, that is the counterbalance to shame. And so, when this crisis came up, I kept saying, it's okay to not be okay. Like, let's like drop this facade of being fine all the time. Um, and let's really talk about not being okay through this process. And so, just thinking about empathy, really, empathy is an antidote to shame. Um, when someone meets a painful story with like understanding versus judgment, I think that is how we can embrace shame. I will leave a list of Dr. Brene Brown's books. Um, they're just very helpful, especially when we're trying to work through shame and vulnerability. So then when we kind of look at like social control and fear of exclusion, there's a lot to lose. I think Steve said it very well. There is a lot to lose when we start separating ourselves from this group. That sense of belonging, and it was very dependent very heavily on family name and, participation and whatnot. But yeah, it's really tough. And so the fear of losing family, community, um, that security, I will say, a lot of times people struggle to leave the system because the system may have saved them, right, from either an abusive home life or brought in consistency when home life wasn't consistent. And so there's a loyalty that comes because of the system in some ways putting some protective factors in. And so, but then we think about like, shaming and being publicly shamed in throughout the church and the impact that has. I mean, I remember we had gospel meeting in our home. I think we're trying to fit like 65 people in our home. And there was a very pointed message about not having a TV and a red cabinet, which we had a red cabinet, which did have a TV in it. And so, but not just talking about it openly, but kind of shaming through testimony.
That's
Was
aggressive.
totally passive aggressive, right?
Yeah.
So, those were always fun experiences. Side note, I used to play roller derby. It was my outlet. I skated for about 13 years. The shame behind that and workers coming in to intervene, trying to save me because I was playing the sport. I look back now and I kind of shake my head, but I mean, that's what we were living. So yeah, I mean, shame is it's a huge topic. But I think it also plays into, why survivors blame themselves for abuse, or question their memories, or push down very appropriate anger, right? And I just want to say, like, these aren't signs of weakness or confusion, but they're very much learned strategies that really kept attachment belonging within the church. So it was kind of a survival response of that. I also want to say, survivors tend to blame themselves because the church has done a really good job at victim blaming and shaming. If I hear one more time the statement, oh, well, that survivor is mentally ill, I may seriously lose it. Um, and so the responsibility and accountability, it's flipped, right? And so, and the onus is on the survivors when it should be the onus should be on the church. And so, then you move into the area of like when abuse or spiritual harm is minimized, where survivors receive the message that their experience was them being in the wrong, right? And so, I mean, and I've heard so many accounts of survivors being told this, or they're labeled as rebellious, or they've lost their spirit, and so for survivors, this kind of shows up as confusion, like second guessing. Within trauma, there's repressed trauma memories. So I kind of want to speak about this really quickly because our brains are really good at protecting us. And our brains, especially with children and adults that go through chronic trauma, our brains protect us, and it can unconsciously block awareness. And it's really a protective mechanism. And so that's why when you hear situations of someone not recalling early childhood trauma until their 40s, 50s, 60s, it's been our brain protecting us. And so so these are what we call repressed trauma memories. And so, but also anger can be suppressed. And I think we'll talk a little bit about anger too. And anger is such an appropriate response to certain situations. And anger in the church has been very repressed, right? You're not supposed to express anger. And so when you start suppressing anger over time, it can turn inward as depression. Sometimes very much self-destructiveness. You can get suicidal. What's interesting is depression in men can come across as anger. If I had a male client coming in to see me, and they are telling me, I've just got anger, that uncontrolled anger. I'm here because of that. It might be because anger management. I will always do a depression screen on them. And I have found that by treating the depression, anger is no longer an issue. And so, when we look at the cause of anger and what drives anger, it can be for all different myriad of reasons. But, we talked a lot about Dr. Mattei, and he strongly feels that chronically suppressing healthy anger causes your immune system to go awry, for your hormones to go awry, your cortisol levels to be off the chart or not have any left because you've burned your candles on both ends, and your inflammatory systems to go awry. So it's super important to address these as they come up, because again, it's going to come out in a physical health way.
It is. 2 points I want to make of everything that you just said. First of all, Steve, one of the biggest reasons I wanted you here too, for a myriad of reasons, but one of them is that you're a guy. And, on Worthy, I talk so much to the women, and we now have a few men that are starting to join, but it's because we're having these conversations on a regular basis around compassion and empathy. We're learning a lot of tools and skills in there around just how do we re-engage in the real world. We talk a lot about getting outside the 2x2 bubble. We talk about that a lot. Part of the reason I wanted to do Survivor is because I wanted to have this conversation publicly, number one. So first of all, I made it public for a very specific reason, to Natalie's point that you made about how shame and all of those things really do affect us, for us to be able to publicly have this conversation with no fear of repercussion, no fear of what anybody's going to think because any of the three of us are on here saying it, like I no longer care. And I'm here to tell you, does that mean that the three of us have a lot of balls, however you want to say it? Yes. But somebody's got to. And so that takes me to my next point, Natalie. I just want to be very clear to anyone watching this. They are the workers, when we're having this dialogue around any of these specific issues, you are a doctor. You are a trained professional. You know exactly what you're doing. You do this for a living all day, every day. Steve, I know you have a lot of education behind you. I have a lot of education behind me. This is what I want to say. Cynthia has a lot behind her. We are educated people who know what we're talking about. We are coming at this from a perspective of incredible levels of compassion. We give hours and hours and hours of our life every week because we care that much and we want what we know to. So I just want people out there to understand the intention, but also understand the education and the knowledge behind the compassion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yep.
I just think that that point really needs to get made and made strongly. And to anybody that's out there listening, I don't care if you're in or out or considering or whatever, no judgment at all from us in any way. Loads and loads of love and compassion, loads and loads of resources and knowledge of things that you can do to get to the other side of what on earth is happening in your mind in the middle of the night and you're waking up and you can't sleep, to know that you're not alone in the way that you're feeling, and you're not alone whether you're a man or a woman. We must start having a dialogue around these important things. And I want to thank you, Steve, for leading the way in that in so many ways. You have been very impactful in bringing some very serious discussions to the forefront and being willing to have them openly and publicly. So for that, I want to really, really thank you.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Chris. So I want to just point out, maybe it's one of the things that there has been a lot of, women that have spoken up and led the charge on, like you and Natalie and Cynthia, as far as being available and outreach, and there hasn't been a lot of men on this front, and I feel like it's a very different animal in some ways for men. There's something stacked against us just even being in the U.S. We have kind of a loneliness crisis with men, which is our own doing largely, but that part of that is that we lack the tools to know how to build friendships. And one of the things that happens when people leave the community, growing up in it, you develop tools for how to make friends with people with a common construct, a common belief system, you have occasions where you're together. Like it's almost like going to university, where it's easy to make friends at the university because everything's kind of set up with everybody the same age, same things, going through the same things. And the church structure provides that for building relationships. It has its constraints because you can't really be vulnerable, especially about things like doubts and concerns. But in a lot of ways, it provides a ton of scaffolding for building relationships. As a result, you don't have a lot of tools when you leave of how that works in general society. And I felt I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how to build relationships with people, especially at this stage when a lot of people's relationships are already pretty stable. They're not necessarily looking for new friends. And it's hard. And I feel like that is one of the things that isn't yet really being talked about, but I hear that struggle and people are starting to voice that that's a hard thing for them to navigate. And the tools to do that aren't well understood. They're not well understood in society in general for men. And it's even more complicated for us coming out of the church and trying to figure out how do we build new friendships if we don't have the tools and never develop them in our early childhood.
Very interesting. So there's a lot of comments coming in that I want to get to here very quickly, but in the purpose of time, I'm going to keep this moving forward. So segment number 5 is what survivors actually need to heal, because we could not have this conversation without having some of that mentioned. So the role of, I want to talk a little bit about validation, safety, consent, nervous system regulation, boundaries, and community without pressure, because we do not have time to go into all of that, but I want to make those points. I want to get them out there. This is just our first conversation of hopefully many. But I want you guys to talk for a second about what those things look like and where do people get that?
So I'll kind of jump into validation, what's helpful, what's harmful. I love the book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, What Happened to You? So it's asking the question of what happened to you versus what's wrong with you. And that helpful validation is really, it's as simple as someone calmly saying what happened to you was real and it was not your fault. And I'm here to hear you and support you with no judgment. What is harmful is minimizing somebody's abuse, premature reframing, meaning, well, look how strong it made you, right? Or, okay, public service announcement, you are not supportive of a survivor when you go into investigation mode. And you start asking them questions about their abuse, and it comes across like you're trying to get to the bottom of the story. Please don't do that. That can be very harmful. And so when we go into the area of safety, what is helpful is providing an environment where there's consistency, where if you say you're going to text somebody and you're going to call them, do it. Don't leave people hanging. Safe people offer predictability, non-judgment, attuned responses. And I tell people, you don't really even have to have a response, just as long as that other person knows you're just willing to be in their space, regardless of how messy it is. And so those are some helpful ways to ensure safety. What's harmful is retelling a survivor story without permission. That is super harmful. Or creating an environment that claims to be healing but becomes gossipy, or there's boundary violations that then again kind of recreates unsafe dynamics. That kind of plays into consent too. So, what's helpful around consent is giving choice about, the pace of the conversation, the topics that people talk about. If you're in person, touch can be a big thing. And even like around spiritual language, especially if there's been a lot of spiritual abuse involved in trauma, what's helpful, come out and ask, hey, is it okay if we talk about this? Or what would be helpful right now? That absolutely restores agency and supports the nervous system with survivors. What is harmful? Pressuring survivors to disclose, forgive, the whole topic of reconciliation, and then also ignoring those nonverbal cues. So when somebody is maybe disassociating and maybe there but not there, and you're not respecting that and you're plowing ahead with the conversation, that's a way for people that are not comfortable with the conversation to say no, and then that doesn't get respected. So that can be super, super harmful. And I'm going over this super fast. This could probably be like a whole segment itself.
Today, I really just want people to know that somebody out there cares enough that
Yes.
we're going to have this conversation more in depth.
Yeah.
I just really want to put language. I want terms out there. I want people to hear the fact that we are acknowledging what they're feeling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just some tools. Okay. Nervous system regulation. There are some tools therapeutic tools, somatic tools, breath work, grounding, um, and a lot of these topics we cover in our advocacy training. And so, shameless plug for our Pathways to Healing advocacy training. If you're interested and you want to learn more about this, or you just want to get the emotional literacy behind how to have these conversations in a trauma-informed way, um, contact Jan, who's the director of our training, and she
Training
can
at
get you.
pathways to healing.org.
That's right.
We'll be putting that in
So
the comments as well.
yeah, and we're gonna be starting a cohort early spring, I think. Oh, maybe in January.
You have one
Maybe
starting in January. Yep.
yeah, okay, in January. So again, so there are a lot of tools that you can learn to help bring the body back into a regulated state. And so it's really being attuned to the person you're talking to and calm, your tone and your voice of inflection really does matter. Um, what is not helpful to nervous system regulation is telling someone to calm down. Not helpful. That can really be shaming and increase anxiety. And then we talked about spiritual bypass and spiritual abuse, bringing that in to kind of override the distress instead of what is the distress signaling. And so you don't want to suppress the emotions, you want to call it out and talk it out. Boundaries was one of your topics. Learning to say no is super important, and being okay with that. So, boundaries around topics that are talked about, or time, or access to you as a person. So being really mindful of that. Harmful boundaries. Again, we talked a little bit about shame. I think, Crystal, we could talk about shame like in a whole segment. I just like touched the very tip of it.
Segments.
I know. But also as an advocate, and if you want to be an advocate, or if you are, it's really important that you keep your own boundaries in check, right? Because your helping should not be over benefiting you and helping the survivor. So oversharing, rescuing, sudden withdrawals, where then the survivor feels like they're abandoned all over again, that can really confuse somebody. So just being mindful of that. And so then lastly, we talked about community without pressure. What's helpful is a low pressure community. So you meet people where they're at. And if you need to be quiet and just give them that space, then that's helpful. I think this is a huge issue too, is there's no single right way to heal, and coming out of a culture of only one way, that actually kind of can play into the healing process as well. And so then that harmful community, where you pressure involvement, or speaking testimony, or wanting a visible transformation, that can really kind of feel icky. And then again, survivor stories that are inappropriately used, because we've ran into that quite a few times.
The biggest thing that I want to make sure that people hear on this part also is that not just stuffing it down and moving on like nothing happened. That's not healing. That it's so. I really just want to, again, the dialogue around acknowledging what happened, addressing the full impact of it, and now being willing to say, okay, maybe I need to just give myself a little grace and time here to heal.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole disconnect with therapy and a lot of those things around the way that many of us were raised. Steve, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One of the things that I run into a lot and realize I've got to really figure out how to deconstruct from is the concept of collision of values. And when we're working with former workers, especially on the bridges and voluntarity, that happens a lot, where there's a tendency and maybe a framework that we come from where if you believe it's in the best interest, like it's good for this person, then there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. Like my intentions are good. But that can often cross boundaries, and it doesn't align with the recipient's values, and it's actually very poorly received. And it's hard to kind of back away and realize that's actually a terrible thing to do to somebody, even though your intentions might be great. It doesn't matter. You're harming somebody even with your good intentions, and that collision of values is something that you it really takes some stepping back from to realize that's what's happening. The other part that I've realized has been super harmful to me, and I've had to do a lot of work on, is the concept of learned helplessness, and which is a originator of anxiety disorders. And if you evaluate a lot of sermons that we heard, they're very much teach learned helplessness. The problem is outside of your control, and the solution's outside of your control. And that teaches you don't actually have any way, like it creates a fear that you can't do anything about. And the work of Dr. Martin Seligman, I find super helpful. He's written a book, several books, but one of them is about learned optimism. And I think if some of these ideas were taken on like I took them on, they created a lot of anxiety problems, and I had to really back away from understanding at a deep level why did that have that effect on me. And once I understood it, it made it a lot easier to manage and develop skills on healing from that damage.
Interesting. Love that. Okay, so the next segment, because we are running out of time, is accountability and the road forward. Where do we look at long-term recovery? What does it realistically look like? And what accountability really needs to happen? Like, I think a lot of people have been wanting accountability around the CSAs and seeing people go to jail and all that kind of stuff. And like that would give them some kind of closure or whatever it is that they need, or something to stand on. But there's so much other accountability that needs to happen here. For all of the things that we are talking about today, there is zero accountability for this humanitarian crisis that is occurring with thousands and thousands of people around the world. And nobody's having this kind of conversation really like out loud like we are right now. So I want to talk about the accountability of all of that. And I want people to up the ante a little bit on the workers and the overseers and say, this is so much more than people going to jail, people. I mean, it's so much more than that. And really, like, I want to turn the table on us not being the bitter and angry ones, like, because we're not. We are the most loving, compassionate, whatever. Like, so if the two of you could speak to that for a minute.
With accountability, I'm going to kind of take a different approach to it around modeling communal care and love for our human beings. Like, I think the lack of, and you've touched on this so many times tonight, Crystal, the lack of love and the conditional, the care being conditioned to whether or not you attend meetings or not. It's just so, it's awful, to be honest. And so it is modeling for people, like, what does it truly mean to sit with somebody, right? And walk this walk with them and to show unconditional love. And so I feel like my calling has been to model that. And so for me, it's modeling that to then show, like, accountability over here. You are claiming to be Christ-like and to, follow in the footsteps of Jesus, and you're not. And so that's kind of a quick answer.
Love it. Steve?
Yeah, I think I think of justice as like there's so much injustice in the world that if that is the success criteria, you'll be perpetually just super disappointed. And so I think of accountability and justice as an aspiration. Like, it's what we aspire to. It's not the end game, it's the journey. And in reality, when justice does happen to a small degree, it's preventative. People realize there are consequences. Maybe the odds aren't super high, but it does happen. And so the the people that are working towards justice, it delivers what we want, which is these things not to happen again because of the preventative aspects of it, even though it's very much imperfect and true justice is not realistic, unfortunately, in the systems that we have. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be the goal and the aspiration. And so that's how I tend to frame it. And I think in terms of accountability, I think it is happening in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people still that are in the church that are like, you know what, I'm not going to gospel meetings. I'm not taking my children to places that I don't feel are safe. And that's happening at a large scale. And I think these conversations are starting to happen too, more and more. Like before I left, I reached out to our sister workers in our field and like, I wanted to have conversations about child appropriate sermons that they were sharing. And I wanted to have conversations about the concept of a conditionally loving God and the mental health problems that was causing me and my children. And unfortunately, it was like talking Greek to them in terms of those concepts. But I'm not, as these conversations happen more broadly through the community, it is going to bring accountability and just even knowledge that these things are a problem. And if you're aware and still causing this harm, that's a different story. But at least we can bring awareness that these things are problematic, they are damaging, and if the community starts to push back, like I don't want my children subject to this, it's going to bring accountability that way.
Love that. We always do better when we know better. And I think that that's, you know, one of the things that a lot of people ask me when I left, there's a song, it was called Ignorance is the Enemy by Rodney Crowell. And that song for me, I listened to that song over and over and over. And it was just that it was my way of telling myself that they don't know what they don't know. And, that kept me from losing my own mind at the time. But there's just so much of that. And I try so hard to not draw that line in the sand. Like education isn't everything, but it's a lot. And they minimize it so much that knowledge is power. And they just don't want to acknowledge that. So I love the fact that I agree. I think accountability is starting to happen in the road forward. What do you think the road forward looks like? More conversations like this, obviously, but what else?
I think it's the education piece is super important that you just mentioned, Crystal. And it's, education. I want our community to heal. And so, and if that means getting in connected to mental health treatment, let's get rid of the stigma around mental health treatment. I can't think of one person on this earth who doesn't need a therapist at one point in their life or another. And let's regard mental health treatment like physical health treatment. Somebody doesn't think twice about walking into an urgent care center if they've got a sinus infection. Let's have the same reaction if we're depressed or we've got some anxiety that or whatever that is, right? Or we have some suicidal thoughts and we've lost our hope. Let's go get a therapist. And so that's, what we want to push is that education piece of it's okay to not be okay. And if you're not okay, there is help out there.
Love that.
Yeah, I think that's maybe part of why I want to do this sort of thing. Like, how can we model what growth looks like? One of the things that was a foreign concept inside the church is that there was more than one path to do anything, and the church would be so much healthier if they were like, you know what, if this church is working for you, great. If it's not, go find another one. Like that would be such a healthier church by itself if that was the concept. And I think that applies here too. What does good mental health and growth look like for you? And it's going to be very different. And that's okay. And go find what that is. Like, be open to it. Like, back away from that framing, like, of the things are black and white. Things are actually very gray. And what do you find works for you? Embrace that. And you're finding that it's not working for you, feel free to move and adapt. And hopefully that's what this community that is evolving and growing and healing is modeling for the whole community.
I love that. I totally agree. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about today is hope without bypassing. What resilience actually looks like, not toxic positivity. So that's the biggest point that I want to make is the whole I want to acknowledge the two by two way of saying, I'm fine, I'm totally, totally fine when you're so not fine. So that toxic positivity, I just want to just throw that out the window tonight once and for all. I know that's not realistic, but I'm going to have that dream anyways. Um, so resilience is real. To talk, I want you guys to both acknowledge what resilience really looks like and that it's not toxic. It's not just, oh, I whatever. It's all of that. And rebuilding trust with themselves, and then also telling their story or why speaking matters. So, go ahead, Natalie.
So I will say this is my clinical response to resilience is it's messy and it's okay. I think you're gonna have days where you feel like you've taken 5 steps forward and then 3 steps back, and that is okay. And what resilience looks like in one person is going to look differently in another person. It really depends on experience. It depends on skill set of being able to kind of self-regulate. We're coming out of a community that did a really good job of comparing one another, right?
Yep.
And so taking a step back and just understanding that my healing journey is going to look completely different than this person's healing journey, and that's okay. There is not a time frame at all, but what I will say is, okay, resilient is going to look like, if you've been struggling with certain symptoms, they're going to soften, not vanish, but they're going to soften over time. For those of you that struggle with triggers, they're going to still appear, but they're going to be far less overwhelming and short-lived. And you're going to have more tools to respond to them. I look at resilience as that inner voice becomes kinder. Shame and self-blame kind of lessens over time. I look at resilience as your boundaries can get clearer, and you're setting the environment and the stage of staying healthy. And so you know how to name your limits and putting a name to it and being very comfortable doing that. So just some quick examples of that.
Love it.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you frame that the church really had toxic positivity because I feel like it just didn't have positivity. There was there just
That's the point.
and maybe about the ideology was very positive about that. It had all figured
Yes,
out. But as an individual, it was very like testimonies tend to be very like I'm worthless.
totally.
And so some of the things that I realized like there's a lot of inner voice that's been trained for a long time that tells us we're not enough, or we're not doing enough. I have lived my life doing things. I'm always have to be doing something to prove I'm worthy of something. And it's really been a process to unlearn some of these behaviors, to change my inner voice, to not be so hard on myself and give myself grace that I'm human. I make mistakes. It's not a judgment on who I am and my character. And so those kind of things are tough to unlearn, and they work, and they snap back very easily. So that is a process, especially when it's been decades and decades of training. But just realize that's there, and I say to people often, just we have to learn how to be kind to ourselves, and it's okay. Like, please do be kind to yourself, but realize that you're judging yourself really harshly. Nobody would judge you this harshly as you judge yourself on these things, and so once you kind of understand, oh yeah, that's true, I wouldn't say that to somebody else. You can start to reframe it and realize how harsh people are to themselves.
I love that. Okay, that is it. I'm going to let the comments speak for themselves just for the sake of time. If you guys could monitor comments as we go forward these next few days, I can tell you that there will be lots and lots and lots of views on this show. So I'm sure there will be lots of comments as well. And within the next 24 hours, Natalie, you and I will get together on the whole list of everything. And Steve, if you could post the books that you recommended as well, that would be very helpful. And then all of that's going to be in the whole Got Questions doc too. But is there anything else? I want to give you guys each final word. If anybody has a pressing question, please put it in the comments and we will refer to it or respond to it in writing. But other than that, I want to thank both of you so much for your time. Not just tonight, but I mean the hours and hours that you put into this and everything that you do and how much you care and how much you love. Not just your own families, but everybody. Like it just is, it's going to take a village. It takes a village for all this to work out. And it's going to take time. You know, it's only been 2.5 years. I say that to myself all the time. Like it didn't happen. Oh, it didn't get this way overnight. It's not going to get fixed overnight. But I just appreciate the fact that we're all committed to it being different for all of us. So last word, Natalie, go ahead. I'm going to start with you.
I think I've used all my words.
That's fair. Very
No,
fair.
yeah, no, I just, I don't, yeah, I've lost all my words. So that
Very
I
appreciative.
would say no, actually my last words are Crystal, thank you. Thank you for creating this space, a public space for us to come on and have, so many conversations have been happening in secret or just within the community that getting this out into the public and having a public conversation about this is how we put words to things that we don't agree with. And that's okay. And we're going to move forward. So thanks for the space. And my heart goes out.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly want to say thanks to you, Crystal, too, for all the conversations, dialogue that you've inspired, and the interest in people feeling okay about themselves and learning how to do that. Um, and yeah, I think that's my closing thought is just give yourself grace as this is
Yes,
hard. These things are hard.
these things are hard. Amen. Okay. With that, totally committed to moving forward. You guys have a great Christmas, a happy New Year. We won't have any shows the next 2 weeks because of the holidays, and we're going to start out next year. So I know that we will be talking again. I know that this panel will be back together before too long. So you guys have a good one. I want to thank you, Steve, for pivoting and making this happen tonight. He had it on the wrong day, so we're good to go. But I really appreciate you stepping up, and kudos to Cynthia for what she's going through. Everything's worked out too. So all the weather that's across the country for everybody. Be safe, everybody. And I just want to just share so much love and huge hearts, and appreciate it all. Have an amazing holiday and a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Yep, it takes me a second to close this down. So this will be posted also on YouTube. So the link will be posted on the site.
Okay.
Okay. Have a
Good.
good one.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Night.
Good night.